The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Glory to you, Lord Christ. Once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Get up. Get out. Get lost. I'm not kidding. Those are words that our former presiding bishop, Catherine Jeffrett Shorey, addressed us with at our convention this past weekend in Grand Junction. She was there to give our opening sermon. She gave a great sermon. She has a different kind of style than most preachers. She does not look up very often. She has her own quirks and preaching uniqueness. I might do this a lot, but she has a way of doing this one side and then talking to the other side like this, so much so that you begin to dance with her. So anyway, she's a fabulous speaker. She was talking about getting up, getting out, and getting lost in conversation. Her point was, quite frankly, that unless we engage in conversation, become curious about the other, we really don't have a whole lot of hope in this world for uniting ourselves. And one of the things that she didn't say, but I think is pretty clear to say, is there is a lot of talk in this world, but not a whole lot of conversation. So I want to call your attention to a couple things about our text. First of all, in Philippians, Paul's ending his letter to the Philippians. In this particular instance, what he's writing about is two women. Their names are Euodia and Syntyche, and they are. He says, I want you folks to help these women. But the problem there is that he's asking them to help two women who have been his opponents in the gospel. And so what he's doing is he's overcoming the differences between those two and himself, and he's asking the community to embrace them because they are working for the gospel just as all the rest of them are, and so they are to help one another. And then he goes on to say, and you know this so well, if anything is true, if anything is just, all of that, think on these things. You might also notice that there's conspicuously something absent there. He doesn't say, if anything is right. The reason why he doesn't say that is because he knows that to claim right and wrong not only is polarizing, but it separates us from the rest of the world and isolates us from the rest of the world and ourselves. And worse, the worst thing it does is it creates suffering among all of us. So Paul's trying to overcome the suffering that is within the community, the divisions, that divide them, divisions that keep them apart. And in the gospel today, it's interesting. It wouldn't be what one would call the happiest sounding gospel. It makes the king sound like he's a very mean person. And it makes the people who didn't come to the banquet seem like they didn't understand what was going on. And just to misunderstand what was going on and the refusal to participate means that they get cast into darkness, where there'll be, my favorite line, weeping and gnashing of teeth. But it's interesting what's going on here. Oftentimes what we do is we attribute to the different characters in the parable, we attribute to them a certain meaning or an allegorical interpretation. In other words, the king here might be God, and the son might be Jesus. And then those who were invited to the banquet might be the Pharisees, and those who were others who were invited to the banquet, the good and the bad, they might be the Gentiles. And so what we do is we attribute different, we try to see ourselves as part of, we identify each of us with somebody within the parable. And that might be okay. That some of that actually happens in other parables. But I wonder if there's something different going on here. And I wonder if rather than look at the people in the parables, we might look at how the parable is constructed in such a way that we see the process of the kingdom. And here's what we see. The kingdom is under threat. In the kingdom is not only refusal to participate, there is violence, there is rage, and there is death. And what's more, there is judgment. And even beyond that, there is judgment for those who fail to acknowledge the importance of the banquet. In other words, if you don't see what's going on here, and you don't open your eyes and begin to see the importance of these trying times, then you have no right to be here. That's what's going on in the parable. So you may have seen last week on the inside of your bulletin that there was something for you to look at. And that's something for you to look at. Said on the inside. It's not in there today. It's a different question today, but it said last week, why am I here? And the point is for all of us to consider that question. Why am I here? Now, I got emails this week saying that's in your bulletin and it's online as well, so you can look at it in both places. I invite you to engage in the four questions, one last week, one this week, and two the next 2 weeks. One of the emails I got said this: what do you mean? I mean, why am I here on this planet? Why am I here at St. Paul's? Why am I here sitting in this pew? And I said, yeah. The point there being is that oftentimes we don't think about it too much. And we just get up and we do our lives. And our lives tend to fall in place for most of us day after day. And so we don't really have to question because our lives do fall in place so well. We don't really have to question much about why we're here. It doesn't seem to matter at times. And so as we think about that question, I wonder if we might think about it in context. The world around us seems to be falling apart. There is violence. There is environmental devastation. There is all kinds of stuff going on that seems to be tearing our world apart. And we sit here and we just let all that go and never ask the question, why are we here and actually a part of that? Then we might begin to fail to acknowledge the importance of these trying times. And that, at least in terms of the parable, is inexcusable. So, when you hear the question, why are you here? It is about why are you here on this planet. It is about why are you here in this church. It is about actually why are you here today in that pew that you have named for yourself over the last 50 years. Jesus. It is Family Sunday at our next service. We'll have a 12-year-old read the reading from Philippians. She'll ask us the same questions that Paul asks us. Whatever is right, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, commendable, whatever is excellent or worthy of being called out. Let us think about these things. A kid will say that to us now. A kid. So to hear it come from a kid's voice is different than hearing it come from our own. It actually does challenge the notion of what we think about church, because to hear a child proclaim that there is something known as truth, and there is such thing as honor, and there is such thing as pleasure in life, and being able to commend different things to each other. To hear a kid call us to that is different, because from a kid's mouth there's a certain two things that come up for us. One is they either are very hopeful that we might be able to do any of those things, or they are despairing that we might not be able to do those things. It's similar to a theological construct that we see in our world, particularly in the Old and New Testaments. And as we think about our stories, why am I here? Well, this is my story. We might consider that there are two scripts being written. One is a script of defiance or fear, and the other is a script of neighborliness. And so what it seems is going on here is that we are teaching our children the way of these two scripts. And I think what we're teaching our children is this: all the violence, all the political division, all the environmental devastation, all those things are things that we are learning to talk about but not be in conversation about. A lot of talk going on, no real, true, honorable, commendable conversation. And so we begin to ask ourselves, what then? What then are we leaving our children with? Are we teaching them how to talk? Or are we teaching them how to enter into a conversation with the rest of the world such that they have hope in the relationships that help form our world? And what I'm talking about right now is reconciliation. You know this. So as our children read to us Scripture, as our children embed Scripture within themselves, we are here once again, to learn from them the things that we once knew too, the things that our commitment to the stories within the Gospels, the Bible, the places that they lead us, some good, some bad. Those stories actually are informative, not just for them, but for us, continually for us as well. As I said, we were at our convention. Really one of the best conventions I've ever been to. Whenever I tell you that if you want to go to convention, just remember that you're going to be walking into something that's very boring. Whenever I tell you that, that's no longer the case. It actually was quite engaging. It was different because it was done in like a series of TED Talks. Y'all know what TED Talks are? TED Talks are little 20-minute conversations, 15 to 20-minute conversations, where a person stands up and gives a really in-depth view into something in particular. And not only just an in-depth view of it, but looking at it in a different way. There were 3 presentations while we were there. The first one was by a man from Episcopal Migration Ministries, talking about what it means to be a nation that is a source of hope for other people. And there's an interesting interesting quotation there from a poem called Home. And in that poem, there's a line that says, no parent puts his child in the water unless the water is safer than the land. Point being there, that there are a lot of places in this world that are so dangerous to live that the sending the person off into the sea in the face of possible death is probably more hopeful than trying to live on the land. The question there is, who are we as a church in that particular world and landscape? And it's interesting to note that of all the people that are settled, all refugees, immigrants who are settled in this country, almost all of them are settled by churches and nonprofits. And the point there is that all the resources that are used to settle people who need a home are at risk. And so we are asked to engage in who we are as a people, as formed by our text and by the prayers for ourselves and for the world, for this country, for this place. We're asked to consider what our place is in that, and should we say something. The second conversation, TED Talk sort of thing, was by two women. They call themselves the Soul to Soul Sisters. They're in Denver. Two women with two powerful voices, voices of struggle and hope. And one of the things that they push before us is the notion that relationships between white people and people of color in this nation continue to be stressed. And that's a reality for all of us. And one of the things they said, which I thought was really interesting, we talk about white conversations with white folks and people of color, white folks and black folks, and they said something very interesting, challenging. What we need is to have white folks go out and talk to other white folks, which I thought was pretty funny. But it's true, we don't have much conversation because it doesn't seem to bother us in this place right here where we are too much in our day-to-day lives. The problem with that is that the things that we ignore and fail to acknowledge will also be things about which we'll be judged. Think about the parable. Refusing to acknowledge what was going on in the gravity of the moment led to a judgment which seemed unfair, but was not unfair. Also, the other third talk we heard was from a guy from Congo, and he was talking about how difficult it is for Congolese to get access to hospitals and clinics and all that kind of stuff. And his point was they need help. And also another point which was underlying that is we aren't the only people in the world who are struggling with health care and all that kind of stuff. It's a worldwide problem, so we don't need to pick ourselves apart too much over it. But we do need to acknowledge that it is something that's tearing us apart, like all the rest of those things are. And so we're back to our former presiding bishop. One of the things that she said was that when we get up and get out and get lost, we are to go get lost in the conversations that our world needs. And what she means by that is that we need to be able to trust in faith that we can actually have conversations with people who disagree with us, and we can, from those conversations, enter into a world differently than the way we've been doing it. We can enter into a world that's not so much about being right as it is about being curious. The rub there is this: in order to be able to enter into a conversation faithfully, by that I mean neighborly, so that we can begin to learn about the others and to love our neighbors, we have to suspend a few things. And sometimes what we have to suspend is our own convictions, because our convictions oftentimes seize us such that we are not open to growth or anything else. This is our former presiding bishop talking to us now. And so the question is, all that said, why are we here? The questions that you'll see in your bulletin over the next few weeks are meant, yes, for our thoughts and to become thoughtful about those things, but they're more than that. They are to send us a signal, I think, that everybody is struggling with the same questions. We're all struggling with the same questions. Oftentimes, though, we're struggling with the questions about a bad world, and we're not struggling with the questions about how to create a good world. And so we're committed to the script that tears us apart, the fear script, not committed to the script, the story that is about building a neighborly, beloved community. And so, as we ask ourselves, why are we here? We wonder if there actually is a piece of us that belongs in the conversations. And I think I say piece because I mean it intentionally. There is a puzzle being put together in our world right now. And if we don't engage in that puzzle, and by we I mean the church, and people of faith, and people who trust God, and people who pray to God, and people who say, as a commitment to my faith, I want to help build a world in which love and compassion and justice reign. I want to be a part of the kingdom. If we are able to lay ourselves in place in that story, in that puzzle, then the question, why am I here, tends to change. We are here to do our part, to play our part, to acknowledge the importance of our time. And I say all that to us as the older ones in our community, and I think that's true here, because the youngest ones in our community are watching us. And they're watching us and they are learning how to answer the question, why am I here? And if what they're seeing from us and the church specifically is that we are here to claim what is right, then they will have been led by us into questions that at the moment are not there. The question at the moment is, what is true? What is true? And that is a question that transcends our convictions. So what is true? That's a question of faith. What's true is that God has called us and formed us and placed us and strengthened and inspired us and given us everything there needs, everything there is for the creation of the kingdom. And if you don't see it that way, like all of us don't see it that way sometimes, then the thing to do is not retreat from the questions of faith, but to start again. Start again with the question, okay, let's try once more. Why am I here? Which is a question that can only be answered with beginning in prayer. Why am I here? Dear God, I need help. I do not at the moment recognize the importance of my own existence here. And I would like for you, in grace and confidence, to tell me something about the nature of my existence that you have given me. It's a prayer. And so, I'm going back to the children again, as we begin to inform our children about the way the world works and how we ought to be in it, I wonder if we might teach them first how to pray and how to enter into a world as faithful young men and women, as little boys and little girls, people who are committed to curiosity, conversation that builds a better, more beloved community. We'll be judged on that. That will be, for us, the very legacy that we will all leave. And I'm telling you people, you and I are all getting very close to the end of our world here. And there's not a whole lot of time to think about it any longer, which is why in the parable, the guy who didn't figure out what was going on got cast out into a darkness. That is not a darkness we want to live in. We do not want to leave an inheritance of fear. We want to leave an inheritance of hopefulness in the gifts that God has given us to create a better world. If we can't do that, then the question, why am I here, doesn't matter. Get up. Get out. Get lost in conversation. You will find Jesus there, not here. Amen.